healthy digestion. Now, the reason why I've chosen this topic, when we think about the times in which we are living, we need to be alert and we need to be listening out for the Lord's instructions, to hear the Lord's voice. And as well as having a clear mind, a healthy digestion will also help us to be able to discern what we need to know. So without further ado, we shall move on. Now, looking at the introduction, what I'd like to speak to you about, we're going to be covering the organs involved in digestion, where they are in the body, the job of each organ, the chemicals produced to help break down food particles, and also we're going to talk about the principles of digestion. So these particular topics, they're not in any particular order, but this is what we will be covering in tonight's discussion, in tonight's presentation. So if we move on to the next slide, we will see here the organs that are involved. And beside it is the diagram of where these organs are situated in the body. So when we look at the digestion of food, it starts in the mouth. Now, as we take the food into our bodies and we chew it, saliva is being produced. And as that saliva is being produced, also a chemical known as amylase is also there. What this particularly does, and it's, by the way, all the chemicals that the body produces, they're known as enzymes. So this particular one, amylase, what it does, it helps to moisturize the food, and it also helps the starch to be broken down into sugar. Once this, the food has passed from the mouth down the throat, then the amylase stops, and so does the starch digestion. So moving on down, we've got the stomach there. When the food reaches into the stomach, it comes into a little ring. It's a ring of muscle that opens up and allows the food to go in. So once the food has gone inside the stomach, then it will start its rhythmic contractions, breaking down the food. And within there, you will find gastric juices. Also, you'll see what is known as pepsin, that acts on protein. And then you've also got the hydrochloric acid. All of those are in the stomach. We then move across the stomach and we see a small little ball just to the left of the stomach. Behind that little ball is a rather large organ known as the liver. And in the liver is the gallbladder. Just underneath the liver is the gallbladder. Now, what the liver does, it produces what is known as bile. That is then stored in the little section there, that little ball known as the gallbladder. And what this does is, as the fats that comes from our food goes in there, it breaks down the fats, it breaks down the oils, and makes it easier to pass through into the small intestine. So the next organ, which is at the top of the small intestine, is known as the pancreas. It's a leaf-shaped organ just below the stomach. So when that lower ring opens up and allows the food to pass through that small intestine, then some will go into the pancreas. The pancreas, that actually produces some of the same enzymes. It produces trypsin, it produces some more amylase, and it produces maltase. And my next slide, I will explain a little bit more as to what they do. So from the pancreas, it moves on down. The food then moves down to the small intestine. And here, quite a lot of things are going on. It tends to stretch and it makes room for larger particles of food. And eventually it does further break down to the point that the food is almost liquid. And so therefore it's able to pass through the bloodstream, go into the different organs that requires the nutrients. And then finally, we have the large intestine. And here, this is where all the undigested products will go. Salt, water, and all of that will be absorbed, pushing the food along until it comes out through the body. So that's the process of digestion and the organs involved, and a little bit of what their jobs are. So we'll move on to the next slide. Oops, not that one. I'd like to talk now about the chemicals that are produced. No, not yet. That's the last slide. Not that one. Is it there? Oh. Okay, if that one's okay, maybe that's not on the slide as I'd hoped. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, each of these, I'll just continue on the slide that has organs involved in digestion. I'm going to place an emphasis here on what's going on inside the stomach. As I mentioned earlier, there's some chemicals in there. And one is the acid, which does a wonderful job of breaking down the foods. It also kills germs and bacteria. And there's another chemical that's in there, and it's known as pepsin. This basically helps to break down the large protein molecules that's in our food, like in our fish, meat, beans, and all those other protein substances. In the pancreas, there is amylase. Now, the amylase that I mentioned in the mouth, in the saliva, is also in the pancreas. And what this does, it actually finishes off the starch, the digestion of starch. There's another enzyme known as maltase. That one actually breaks down sugars. And there's also another called lipase, which breaks down the fats. Now, I mentioned that the gallbladder also does the same job, which breaks down the fats and the oils. So we have two methods there of fat digestion. Going now down to the small intestine, which basically expands itself to allow for more fat to be broken down. So for those very fatty things like meats and cheeses and oils with really fat, large fat chains, then the small intestine is very good at breaking that down. And then once all that process is done, then it goes into the large intestine and is ready for processing and eventually leaving the body. So the final slide I'd like to share with you is principles of digestion. What I've got here is just some things for us to bear in mind. They're not hard and fast rules. They're just recommendations, just suggestions. And if we practice this on a regular basis, we will find that our tummies will be a lot more comfortable. There will be less bloating. there'll be less discomfort, and we'll find ourselves having a lot more energy. So this is the benefits of these principles. The first one, eat 3 meals a day. Why do I say this? To keep the body fueled, to keep it energized. And it's best to leave gaps between 3 to 4 hours between meals. Reason? The food stays in the stomach. Well, it stays in the stomach for 1 hour, but throughout the entire digestive process, it can take up to 4 to 5 hours, depending on what you've eaten. Drink water 1 hour before and 2 hours after meals. Roughly the same reason. Now, the water, if you drink and eat, I mentioned that hydrochloric acid. It's essentially important that that hydrochloric acid is at the concentration that it's at. It has to be perfect. And if it's diluted, then it kind of affects the digestion of a particular meal. And so it's best to wait 2 hours. When at least the food is in the intestine, then you can have the water. Try to have the last meal by 7 p.m. The reason for this is because when you go to bed, again, because of digestion time and bedtime, you don't want those two close together. Otherwise, it will affect the sleep. Digestion takes a lot of energy, and it's important for us as well, as was said previously, to get a good night's sleep. The next one, try food combining. This is basically different types of meals. So for example, at lunchtime, have starch with vegetables at one meal. And then for dinner in the evening, you could have protein and veg for another meal. Why do I say this? The stomach is digesting proteins, busy digesting proteins. Starch is in there, and there's nothing to digest the starch with. So what that does, it will sit in the stomach for quite a while. It needs to be passed through within an hour, and it's still sitting there because it's busy processing the protein. And so there's quite a lot of work for the body to do. And also we've got to realize that the molecules of starch and protein are of different sizes. That's another thing to bear in mind. And the final thing, this is very good for detoxification. Fruits are good for this because they are light, they're water-filled, and they pass through the tummy easily. And the best time to eat the fruits is on an empty stomach in the morning. So if we follow these principles, as 3 John 2 says, I pray that you will all prosper and be in health. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you've learned some things tonight. God bless you.